It was Monday, 14th October 2024, and the rain over Cedar Grove, Ohio, had that thin, cold edge that seeps through wool and settles into old bones. I was at the Cedar Grove Municipal Court by 6:18 a.m., as I always was, carrying my black coffee in a plain white thermos with a crack near the lid. I like the courthouse before the doors open, before the phones ring, before excuses and grief and fear begin to fill the air. My father taught me long ago that if you arrive before everyone else, you remember who the room belongs to. It belongs to the law, and the law belongs to no person. My clerk, Denise Harper, was already at her desk when I came down the back hall in my dark navy coat. Denise had worked with me for 11 years, and she knew my face better than most people knew their own children's handwriting. She looked up from a stack of files, pushed her glasses higher on her nose, and said, "Your Honor, Special Prosecutor Bell just called. They added a supplemental exhibit at 5:42 this morning." I set my thermos down, took off my gloves, and asked the question I always ask first. "Lawful chain of custody?" Denise nodded once. "Yes, Judge. Signed, sealed, logged at 6:01 a.m. The file waiting at center position on my bench was stamped, State of Ohio vs. Roland Mercer, Case 24, TRD 1187 and 24 CRB 4421. Before I ever opened it, I knew the shape of trouble from the weight of it alone. Mercer was not just any defendant. He was the police chief of Cedar Grove, a man whose name sat on patrol memos, city banners, donor plaques, and social media posts with equal ease. He had been arraigned on Monday, 7 October 2024, had rejected a plea agreement on Wednesday, 9 October 2024, and had come into my courtroom demanding a continuance and a motion to dismiss by Friday noon. That is the kind of rush a guilty man mistakes for power. At 8:27 a.m., Bailiff Calvin Reed opened the courtroom doors and called, "All rise," and the room stood with the slow scrape of benches and damp shoes on tile. I stepped onto the bench, looked out over the gallery, and felt that small shift in the air that comes before a storm breaks. The rain tapped the high courthouse windows. The old vent over the jury box hissed like a tired kettle. I had seen thousands of faces from that chair, but when I saw who sat at counsel table that morning and who sat 3 rows behind him with both hands folded in her lap, I knew I was looking at a day that would stay with me until my last one. Roland Mercer was 46 years old, 6'1", broad through the shoulders, and dressed as if the whole city were a mirror built for him alone. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit so sharp it looked pressed onto him, a white shirt with monogrammed cuffs, and Hermes belt with the gold buckle turned just enough to catch the courtroom lights, and a Patek Philippe Nautilus on his left wrist. His hair was trimmed within an inch of vanity. He had that expensive tan some men carry in October like a lie. Even seated, he held himself with the careless lean of a man who thought every room would finally apologize to him. He did not look at me first. That told me almost as much as if he had. He looked at the gallery, then at the deputy from County Transport, then at the local reporter from the Cedar Grove Sentinel, and only then raised his eyes to the bench with the kind of small smirk I had seen on spoiled boys and corrupt officials since before some people in that room were born. His black 2023 Porsche Panamera Turbo S had been photographed outside on Main Street by 8:03 a.m., parked in a no-standing zone with city police plates still hanging from the rear bracket. Even after arraignment, even after the news cameras, he had arrived like a man stepping into his own club. His lawyer, Gregory Salter, sat beside him in a navy suit and silver tie, flipping through a binder thick with tabs and objections. Mercer kept checking his phone until Bailiff Reed told him, "Sir, device off." He sighed like a king asked to lift his own cup. Then he muttered, not quite softly enough, "This whole thing is theater." I wrote that down. My father used to say that contempt often arrives before truth because pride hates waiting in line. If you have ever looked at someone powerful and wondered whether anyone will truly stop them, I want you to hold that feeling for a moment. Ask yourself what happens in a town when ordinary people stop believing the bench can still hold. That question was sitting in my courtroom long before I spoke a word. And by the time this day was over, every person in that room would have to answer it. 3 rows back sat Elena Ruiz, 39 years old, shoulders narrow from too many double shifts and too many nights sleeping on one side of the bed so her mother could rest in the next room without hearing her cry. She wore a clean thrift store blazer over pale blue scrubs, the cuffs softened from many washings, and sensible black shoes that had seen more hallways than dance floors. Her dark hair was pulled into a plain knot low at her neck. No jewelry except a small silver cross. No performance, no anger on display, just quiet, careful attention, the kind that comes from living on thin margins where every mistake costs blood. Elena had been a registered nurse for 16 years, the last 9 with Mercy River Home Health in Cedar Grove. She covered the East Side and the Old River District, the part of town with cracked porch steps, peeling shutters, unpaid electric notices, and people too proud to ask for help until help became an emergency. Her husband, Daniel Ruiz, had died in a warehouse accident 5 years earlier on 19th of June 2019. Since then, she had raised their son, Mateo, who was 12, while also caring for her mother, Rosa Alvarez, age 67, whose kidneys were failing slowly and meanly. Elena was 2 mortgage payments behind, exactly $2,040, and she kept cash for groceries in an old tea tin above the refrigerator because envelopes felt too hopeful. When she rose to take the oath, she did not straighten her back like someone trying to impress the room. She straightened it like someone who had been carrying too much for too long and had simply decided not to bend in public. Denise Harper held out the Bible. Elena placed her hand on it and said, "I do," in a voice so steady that the room leaned toward her without knowing it. Mercer did not turn around. He was busy adjusting his cuff and whispering to Salter. The case had begun at 10:47 p.m. on Thursday, 3rd October 2024, at the intersection of Ashbury Avenue and 7th Street in Cedar Grove, half a block from Benton Floral and directly across from the old Lake Federal Credit Union building. Elena had just finished a 14-hour shift, then made an extra stop at 118 Bell Street to check on Arthur Boone, an 81-year-old home oxygen patient whose daughter lived in Dayton and had not been able to reach him. Elena had used her own money, $684.22, to buy a portable backup oxygen battery after the supplier delayed a delivery for 6 days. She placed it in the trunk of her 2012 Toyota Corolla because if Mr. Boone lost power overnight, he would not just be uncomfortable, he could die. She entered Ashbury on a green light, traveling east at about 28 miles per hour. The city traffic camera later showed that clearly. Mercer was driving south on 7th in that black Porsche at 52 miles per hour in a 35 zone. The light for him had been red for 3.8 seconds when he entered the intersection. He hit Elena's driver's side quarter panel with enough force to spin her Corolla counterclockwise into a yellow fire hydrant on the northeast curb. Her left wrist struck the doorframe. Her ribs slammed into the center console. The oxygen battery in her trunk shattered against the jack compartment. Steam rose from her hood in the night air. Lila Benton, age 58, owner of Benton Floral, heard the crash from inside her shop while counting register money. Darius Cole, a 41-year-old Route 6 bus driver on break, saw it from the stop bench across the street. Both would later testify under oath. But what happened in the 4 minutes before the first marked unit arrived mattered more than Mercer ever understood. Elena crawled out through the passenger side because her driver door had crumpled inward. She was bleeding from the lip, shaking and trying to get her breath. Mercer stepped out of the Porsche, looked at his front fender first, then at her and said, "You just cost yourself more than your whole car is worth." That was not the statement of a frightened driver. It was the statement of a man already looking for the smaller person in the room so he could stand on them. Elena told me that she said, "Sir, the light was green for me." Mercer took 3 steps closer, smelled of whiskey and mint, and said, "You don't tell me what the light was. I know this intersection better than you know your own neighborhood." Then he saw the dash camera mount on her windshield with the little red blink still active. According to Elena, his face changed right there. Not panic, calculation. If you think you know where this is going, stay with me anyway. Some cases show you their teeth right away, and some smile first. What came next was the part even seasoned people in my courtroom did not see coming. And the truth, when it arrived, was colder than the rain outside. Officer Trent Holloway, badge 417, arrived at 10:56 p.m. in Unit 214. Officer Marisol Vega, badge 233, came 30 seconds after him in Unit 221. Holloway had served under Mercer for 7 years. Vega had transferred from County Patrol 11 months earlier and still wore her duty belt like it meant something. By the time both officers reached the scene, Mercer was already standing near the curb with his phone pressed to his ear and one hand inside his coat pocket. Elena was sitting on the sidewalk, one palm flat against her ribs, her nursing bag in the gutter beside her. Her Corolla's driver's side was bent inward like crushed foil. Holloway spoke to Mercer first. That mattered. Vega went straight to Elena and asked if she needed EMS. Elena said, "I can't afford the ambulance unless I really need it. I have heard many sad things from the bench, but those words will still stop a room when spoken plainly." Vega later testified that Mercer interrupted before Elena could finish and said, "She's fine. She turned in front of me." When Vega asked whether a field sobriety screening was needed because she smelled alcohol, Mercer gave her a long look and said, "You can head back to traffic duty, officer. I've got this." Mercer did not have it. What he had was nerve. Vega saw the red light phase on the signal control box data panel. She saw the skid pattern from Mercer's Porsches starting only 8 feet before impact, which suggested late braking. She saw Elena's dash camera attached to the windshield by its suction mount, but no memory card in the side slot. She noted all of that in her field notebook at 11:03 p.m. The notebook would become more important than any person in that room knew that morning. Elena called her sister Ana Ruiz at 11:11 p.m. from Vega's phone because Mercer had ordered Holloway to hold Elena's own phone for evidence. The call log showed it lasted 1 minute and 16 seconds. Ana came from North Birch Street in pajamas and a winter coat over them, carrying a reusable grocery bag because she knew Elena would not leave the scene without trying to salvage something. By then, Holloway had written Elena a citation for improper turn and arranged for Monarch Recovery and Towing, owned by Curtis Van, to seize her Corolla. Standard city policy required crash vehicles involving city personnel to go to the secured municipal impound lot on Dalton Road. Mercer knew that policy by heart. He signed it 3 years earlier. Elena stood there in the wet street watching the tow straps lift the only car she had. In the trunk were the broken oxygen battery, a bag of groceries, her spare scrub top, and a paper folder with utility bills she planned to sort after Mateo went to bed. She asked if she could at least remove the battery in her nursing bag. Holloway told her no, not until clearance. Mercer said nothing. He just checked the damage on his Porsche under the glow of the tow truck light and asked Curtis Van whether his detail shop could buff out most of it by morning. There are moments when cruelty is not loud at all. Sometimes it sounds like scheduling. Elena did not cry at the scene. That was not her way. She went home with Ana at 12:02 a.m. on Friday, 4th October 2024, took 2 ibuprofen, put frozen peas on her ribs, and woke up at 5:30 a.m. because her mother needed help to the bathroom. At 7:14 a.m., she called Monarch Recovery asking for her car and her medical equipment. They told her release was on police hold. At 8:40 a.m., she called Mercy River and told her supervisor she could still work the afternoon route if someone else could lift patients with her left arm out. At 9:05 a.m., she learned Arthur Boone had been taken to St. Agnes Emergency after his home oxygen failed, and no backup battery had arrived. That was the first crack in the room when Elena said it from the witness stand. She did not dramatize it. She did not point. She just told the truth. "I kept thinking," she said, folding and unfolding the edge of a tissue she never used. "If they had let me open the trunk, Mr. Boone would have had what he needed." The gallery went still. Even Gregory Salter stopped writing for a moment. "I want to ask you something quiet before we go farther. Have you ever had one bad night cost you 10 things at once while the person who caused it slept fine? That is the kind of pain that does not yell. It just keeps showing up on the kitchen table." And Elena Ruiz carried that kind of pain into my courtroom with both hands open. Mercer's first appearance before me on Monday, 7th of October 2024, had already told me what kind of man he intended to be in court. During arraignment, he leaned back so far in his chair I thought it might tip, entered a not guilty plea, rejected the prosecutor's plea agreement without even glancing at the terms, and asked for a continuance so broad it would have pushed the trial into December. When I denied that request and set the bench trial for 14th October, he smiled at me and said, "I'm sure the city will enjoy the show." I told him the city was not on trial. He replied, "We'll see." By the morning of trial, his defense had filed a motion to dismiss claiming selective prosecution, political pressure, flawed probable cause, and unreliable witness memory. Gregory Salter argued it smoothly. He was polished, practiced, and careful not to overreach. Mercer was none of those things. As Salter spoke, Mercer kept drumming his fingers on the table, tapping his watch face, and glancing back at Elena with the kind of bored contempt rich men often mistake for control. Once, while Denise marked Exhibit 4A, Mercer whispered loudly enough for the first row to hear, "This whole town runs on my people, not on paperwork." I denied the motion to dismiss at 9:18 a.m. I said the same thing I have said from the bench more times than I can count. Power over others does not create immunity from process. If anything, it creates greater duty. Mercer rolled his eyes and exhaled through his nose like a horse bored with its own stable. The reporter from the Sentinel wrote that down fast. So did I. Special Prosecutor Hannah Bell then laid out the state's opening in plain language. Mercer, she said, had not only caused the crash through reckless operation, but had used his office to influence the responding officers, direct an unlawful tow, and deprive Elena Ruiz of access to her property and evidence. Bell was young, maybe 34, but she had that clean courtroom voice that lands without needing force. She told the room exactly what they were about to hear: a traffic camera, field notes, dispatch logs, a towing invoice, sworn testimony, a missing memory card, and one more thing she asked leave to reserve for rebuttal because the state had only secured it that morning under a certified chain of custody. Mercer smiled when she said that, not because he was calm, because he thought he already knew every document that existed. That smile would leave his face before lunch. Lila Benton took the stand first. She wore a burgundy sweater, rain boots, and the tired look of someone who had missed a full morning of business to tell strangers something she wished she had never seen. She said she had turned off the lights at Benton Floral at 10:46 p.m., heard an engine winding like it wanted attention, and looked through the front glass just in time to see Mercer's black Porsche shoot down 7th Street. The light was red, she said, not turning red, red already. Long enough I noticed it before he hit her. Salter tried to shake her by asking about rain glare and distance. Lila folded her hands and answered, "Counselor, I've sold flowers on that corner for 22 years. I know the difference between a red light and a rose." Darius Cole came next. Big man, soft voice, Cedar Grove bus badge clipped to his jacket. He had been eating peanut crackers under the shelter bench when the crash happened. He testified that Elena's Corolla entered on green and that Mercer never got close to the speed of ordinary traffic. He was flying, Darius said, and he held his palm flat in the air like a car slicing through wet dark. He also testified that after impact, he heard Mercer say, "Turn that thing off," while pointing toward Elena's windshield. Salter objected. I overruled. It came in. Then Officer Marisol Vega took the stand in full uniform, hair pinned back tight, notebook in hand. A truthful officer carries herself a certain way. She does not posture because she does not need to. Vega identified her field notes from 3rd October 2024, confirmed badge number 233, and testified that when she arrived, Mercer appeared agitated, dismissive, and focused on control of the scene rather than medical status of the involved citizen. I noticed the gallery murmur at the phrase "involved citizen." People hear themselves in words like that. Bell asked her whether Mercer instructed her to leave scene analysis to him. Vega said yes. Bell asked whether she complied. Vega said no. Then Bell asked the question that changed the room by a degree. "Officer Vega, did the defendant say anything to Officer Holloway about fault assignment?" Vega answered, "Yes, he said, and I wrote this down at 11:04 p.m. Write the nurse. I don't care what the light says. She won't fight this." Mercer sat up straight for the first time all morning. There are some moments when truth does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like a needle dropped on stone. You hear it because the room goes that quiet. I remember the vent hum, the scrape of a shoe in the last row, and Mercer's jaw clenching once on the right side. If you know someone who has ever been told they would not fight back because they had less money, less title, less reach, send this story to them when we are done. Some people need to hear that a sentence like that can still come home to its speaker. Salter tried hard with Vega. He suggested resentment because Mercer had denied her transfer request months earlier. Vega said the transfer request had been approved. He suggested she misunderstood a heated scene. Vega lifted her notebook. "That is why I wrote it down at 11:04 p.m., she said, before anyone had time to improve their memory. I will admit I almost smiled. Not because it was clever, because it was disciplined. Then came the documentary pieces. Denise marked the dispatch log showing Holloway requested Monarch recovery at 11:08 p.m. rather than city impound. She marked the city policy memo signed by Mercer on 2nd February 2021, requiring all collisions involving city employees or officers to use secured municipal storage. She marked Monarch's invoice, which billed Elena Ruiz $486 in tow and first-day storage, even though release had been blocked by police hold. Bell laid them out one after another like stepping stones across a river. Mercer crossed his arms tighter each time. At 10:31 a.m., the state played the traffic camera footage from Lake Federal Credit Union. It had no sound, only grainy night vision and a timestamp in the lower corner, but it was enough. Elena's Corolla entered on green. Mercer's Porsche entered on red. The impact flared white in the rain. Someone in the gallery gasped. Someone else whispered, "Lord." Mercer stared straight ahead and did not blink for several seconds. I have watched many defendants look at their own choices on a screen. Some flinch, some break, some harden. He hardened. Bell then offered photographs of Elena's car, the broken oxygen battery from her trunk, and the dash camera mount with the memory card missing. Salter objected to relevance on the battery. I overruled. Harm is relevant when a defendant has treated a person's life like debris around his inconvenience. Elena sat very still while the photos passed to the witness stand. Her hands were clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. Mercer finally leaned to his lawyer and spoke with visible irritation. Salter asked for a sidebar. At the bench, he renewed his request for a continuance, saying the defense needed more time to review the supplemental exhibit and evaluate the growing emotional tone in the room. I told him the room was not on trial and neither was emotion. The facts were moving exactly where the facts had earned the right to move. Continuance denied. When we returned to open court, Mercer laughed under his breath and said, "Of course." He had begun to understand that his usual exits were narrowing. Sometimes the hardest thing to face is not punishment. It is plain evidence that refuses to bow. I want you to look at your own life for 1 second here. Think about the times you were sure no one saw what really happened. Then think about what it means when one careful note, one witness, one old camera, one honest person says otherwise. That is how rotten stories finally begin to crack. Elena returned to the stand after the recess at 10:46 a.m. The rain had stopped by then and sunlight came through the high windows in pale strips, as if the room itself wanted a clearer look. Bell asked her about the days after the crash. Elena testified that on Friday, 4th October, she called the department property desk and was told her phone would be returned once the chief cleared it. She testified that Mercer himself called her at 6:12 p.m. from a blocked number and said, "You have a son, right? Mateo. Best thing for everybody is you pay your ticket and move on." The gallery shifted at that. Denise froze with her pen halfway over the docket sheet. Bell asked how Mercer knew her son's name. Elena said she had never told him. The only place it appeared that night was on the school pickup magnet in her car window and in her license return, which officers had run through dispatch. She said she slept with the kitchen light on that weekend because the same black SUV drove slowly past 118 Bell Street twice on Saturday night, 5 October at 11:23 p.m. and again at 11:41 p.m. Salter objected, but Bell had the ring footage cued. It showed a city-issued Chevrolet Tahoe with partial plate GJX204. Mercer did not turn his head toward the screen. The room changed then. Up to that point, many people had come expecting a traffic case with ugly edges. Now they were staring at something else, not just recklessness, intimidation, misuse of office. A powerful man leaning on a nurse in her own home because he believed fear was cheaper than truth. I have seen anger in a courtroom. What settled over that room was different. It was disappointment with teeth. Officer Holloway was called by the defense. That told me Salter no longer trusted the state's silence on him. Holloway walked in stiff, sweat already dark at the collar. He identified himself, badge 417, 7 years with Cedar Grove PD. Under direct examination, he claimed Mercer never ordered him to cite Elena and that Monarch recovery had been called because city impound was temporarily full. Bell asked to impeach with records. She produced municipal lot inventory showing 14 open spaces on 3rd October at 11 p.m. Holloway swallowed hard. Bell then asked whether he had run Elena's plate and license return after the crash. Yes. Whether her son's name appeared on emergency contact data attached to her prior school zone warning from February 2024. Yes. Whether he had shared that return with Mercer. Long pause. Then, yes. That answer did more damage than any raised voice could have. Mercer dropped his eyes to the table. Salter rubbed his temple. Holloway looked like a man who had just heard the floor give way beneath him. Bell asked one final question. Officer Holloway, were you instructed by the defendant to hold Ms. Ruiz's phone and vehicle longer than necessary? He said, I was told to keep it tied up until she got realistic. Even now, saying those words back in my mind makes my jaw tighten. By 11:22 a.m., Mercer was cornered by facts in a way men like him almost never experience in public. Yet remorse still did not come. He had irritation, yes. He had anger. He had the stiff, hot stillness of a man being crossed in front of strangers. But he did not have shame. That absence mattered more than most people understand. Remorse does not erase harm, but its absence tells a judge what punishment must still teach. If your stomach is tight right now, stay with me. The most important piece had not been shown yet, and everyone in that courtroom could feel it circling just outside the door. I had seen that feeling before, when truth is close enough to smell but not yet close enough to name. And when it finally stepped inside, even I had to take one slow breath before I spoke. After a short recess, Bell called Denise Harper forward to mark State's Supplemental Exhibit 12F, the one she had mentioned that morning. Bell explained that it came from a lawful forensic extraction of publicly available and preserved social media material, cross-matched with service provider response, screen recorded at 5:17 a.m. on 14th October 2024, and logged into evidence at 6:01 a.m. under sealed chain of custody. Salter objected before she even finished, but his voice lacked its earlier polish. I overruled subject to foundation. Bell said the foundation would come from Special Investigator Caleb Nunez of the County Cyber Unit, already sworn and waiting outside. Nunez testified first. He was careful, exact, and dull in the way good technical witnesses should be. He explained how the state preserved Mercer's public Instagram story and related account metadata from the handle or Chief Mercer Live. Then the screen in my courtroom lit up with the post time stamped 11:18 p.m. Thursday, 3rd October 2024. The image showed Mercer on the rooftop patio of the Vail House Hotel, hair dry, shirt changed, holding a rocks glass beside a fire table. In the lower left corner, partly visible behind him under valet lights, was the damaged front quarter of his black Porsche. The caption read, "Another night cleaning up Cedar Grove's mess. Some people should stay in their lane."